Columbia undergrad. Although I did like mostly philosophy, so I didn't actually have to do real work, which has been sort of part of my life strategy, is to not have anything where you have to actually turn anything in. That's sort of my strategy, and just talk all the time. Anyways, and we also have, we have a bunch of students who I presume if you're here, you're interested in startups, and I think you're mostly, I guess maybe raise your hand if you're a engineering student, CS student. And so people like, if you're not a CS student, what are you?
Financial economics.
Okay.
And physics minor.
Okay, that's real. Physics counts. Okay, and
I did undergrad in CS, but I was at Columbia for film.
Oh, cool. Okay. Are you interested in startup stuff, or?
Yeah.
Okay. And some of you may have been, I don't know, we went up and spoke up there. I don't know if you guys were there for that. So, and then we also have a few companies here who I think can kind of help talk a little bit about startups. And I think pretty much every startup I know is hiring, people, and particularly computer science people. So you can just take it as an assumption that there's job openings pretty much in every startup. And so, yeah, with that, is anyone here thinking about starting a company, or are you guys thinking about joining a startup? Like, maybe raise your hand if you, or you know what, I'll tell you what, so we have a small enough group, why don't we just go around and just introduce yourself, say your affiliation, and say, what you're thinking, if you're thinking about doing something new or joining something, like what you're looking for. So let's start over here.
So, hey everyone, I'm Jason, CTO of OMGPOP, and I want to join a startup. And we want you to join our startup.
So OMGPOP, if you don't know, is a very cool, it's a social game site that's very popular. Millions of people play it. It's like, they've got like, like Mario Kart, and there's like some it's pretty much the best Flash stuff I've ever seen, I think. It's very cool. And they're doing very well and growing, and so if you want to make games online, that's,
Yeah, I'm Nate from OMGPOP as well. Work with Jason. We're hiring especially for also probably offering internships. So anything working on like the back end of games to doing like more analytics and data stuff. Right? We have all these users. Everyone's clicking. We want to get them to pay. So it's really interesting analyzing like all the user behavior, like what they're doing in the game, what they're doing outside of the game, who's inviting who. So some cool things to think about was like there's like this huge network of friends, like who's the most important, right, on the network, and like how do you get that person to invite all their friends, right? Another problem maybe like there's everyone's like clicking on the shop to like buy coins or buy in-game energy. Like how do you optimize that? How do you get people to do the things you want them to do? So it's a really cool environment, especially it's in a game mentality, right? So people are clicking, and there's kind of like these small feedback loops of like you click and we reward you with like coins, so we kind of get you addicted. And so there's like a lot of game theory, a lot of probability, a lot of all of that, as well as all these engineering problems too. So scaling to millions of users and all that's a big challenge in itself. So those are the kind of things we deal with.
And can you guys talk, maybe maybe you should use a mic, but briefly about, just a couple things I'll say is anyone here considering like Wall Street or something else? So, okay. Well, you're the financial economics guy, so I figured that.
I kind of work with you right now. So.
You work with Wall Street, on Wall Street now?
Like I consult for companies.
On the technical stuff, or?
Yeah.
So I worked for a hedge fund for 3 years after Columbia. I kind of got, I was freelancing programming while I was at school to pay the bills. And if you are a freelancer, you just sort of, all you really care about is like someone pays you more money. You're like, all right, I'll do that job. And of course in New York, that means you end up in finance, because that's, and then I kind of got sucked into it. And, and it's seductive because you get paid a lot of money, and I was broke and I had loans, and it's the same usual story. And like, it was nice, it paid off my loans, but then realized that, you know, sitting in front of a computer and like getting yelled at and people literally throwing stuff at you, calling you like a fucking idiot in front of 50 people, like, and that's what people put up with on Wall Street because it's just the norm, and they pay so much money that they just sort of assume that's like the, you know, that's the tax on your $500,000 salary or whatever the hell. You know, whereas I think one of the big sort of differences with startups, and one of the reasons we wanted you guys to come here instead of going, you know, us going up there, was that you could just kind of see, you know, feel free to hang out afterwards, whatever. This is, I think, a fairly typical environment where, you know, it's sort of a casual, nice office space with nice people. There's people who are generally not throwing stuff unless it's like for social reasons or something. And you know, I think more importantly, the projects you get to work on tend to be much sort of less siloed. You know, when you're in a bigger organization, whether it be Wall Street or Google or anything, you know, just by nature, it's a big machine, and you'll be put on like a little thing here. Whereas in a startup, you often, one of the best things about it is that you often get to sort of really own something. So you sort of like will get put in charge of, you know, hey, let's have you improve, you know, how many of these guys buy like, you know, super power-up missiles on Mario Kart, right, or whatever. And like you're in charge of the whole thing from the coding to like kind of the game mechanics to like the analytics or whatever. I mean, it tends to be much more like, you know, you're sort of really owning like a product within a company. And that's important because, you know, I think it diversifies the sort of skills you have. And, you know, eventually, I mean, my view is if you're a serious sort of computer person, you know, I don't know, maybe some people maybe want to program their whole lives, but I think a lot of other people want to like eventually develop other skills. So for example, if you want to start a company, I think, you know, the best way to do it is either to start a company or to go join a startup, and you learn a lot of the skills. And, you know, you work in an open environment, you see all these things going on, you see how the different groups work, you see fundraising, you see all these kinds of things that you know, that help you learn those kinds of skills. And you know, and then sort of prepares you for you know, going and doing it yourself, or and so, you know, that's part of. But maybe if you guys could briefly talk about, take the mic, I guess, and talk briefly about your own career paths, I guess, and startups and other things like that. And like people think of it as like you're either Mark Zuckerberg starting and magically the thing takes off, or, you know, or it's like some super, whereas in fact there's a sort of, there's like some super risky thing where in fact there's this whole world of startup thing. It's a big world, and there's lots of interesting jobs that don't involve either getting, you know, winning the lottery in college or, you know, living your life on ramen noodles or something, right? Like, so like that's what we're trying to kind of just give you some sense of here. I think is just that there's sort of a lot more interesting and richer kind of world.
Yeah, so I've pretty much always worked in startups. I started out of college. While I was still in college, I interned at a company that did video for the Army, so that people can communicate with their families. Eventually I went to another company, so that was a startup. I got to, you know, I was friends with the CEO. I learned about business. And then as I moved forward, I got a better job at a different place that did dog collars for tracking your pet when it runs away. So that was literally a 3-person company. I was the first employee under the person who started it. And I got to, you know, I developed the software. I got to lead teams even though I was just out of college, which was cool. I just learned about pretty much every part of the business. And then I got to see the process of trying to sell a company. So eventually we sold to Pfizer. So I went to work for Pfizer, and I was like, oh wow, so this is like what a corporate, you know, company is. I ate in their cafeteria, and it was kind of weird. So I left after like 2 months, and eventually went to a sub-company of the first video company I was at, because they had just made all this money from the Army. I became CTO of that company and got to develop their entire platform, research APIs, figure out how we're going to work, So then, by then I was managing people under me, even though I was only 2 years out of school. And then eventually that kind of ran out. So I got to see also like the die down of a company, which is important to like, you know, as someone new, you kind of don't know sometimes when like a company is dying around you. So that was an interesting experience. So then I came to OMGPOP. I always loved video games, so that's the other thing. You know, if you're gonna work for a big, you know, corporate place, you're gonna work on like a tiny chunk of a tiny project probably, and be in meetings most of the day. So in this one, you know, it was just me, 5 other people in a room trying to make a video game website. So, you know, and now over the last 2 years, we've grown to almost 30 people, you know, and I work with Nate here, and we, you know, are dealing with scale. So up until then, I only had to worry about a few thousand people on my website. Things change a lot when you have to worry about a few million people on your website. So it's always, if you're like really learning and, you know, learning from people around you, and also learning like from, you know, I sit next to like the CEO, so, you know, learning about all the things Chris talked about. It's definitely the place to get exposed to more things and also make a difference, where, you know, if you do a project in OMGPOP and you launch it, the next day you'll get feedback from like 1 million kids going, oh my God, this is broken, and then you go, ah. So it's pretty cool. Is that?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if Nate wants to talk about what it's like to work here.
Sure.
You guys just hear me?
I think we're also videoing.
Oh, okay. Guess that's required.
You're gonna be on national TV.
International
TV.
Awesome. You hear me? So I just graduated in 2009, and before that, you know, I was kind of in your guys' position too. Like I was like, okay, I'm the CS guy. I don't really know what I want to do, because like, how do you know what you want to do, right? So everyone in my fraternity was like gung ho about finance. Naturally, I was too, kind of. So I did some like internships. I did an internship at this place called like FX Alliance. They make some trading software. And then I also did an internship at Lehman Brothers. So I mean, just you know, to kind of highlight the fact that you work on like individual projects, you know, highly specialized. I was like, you know, I ended up you know, going there. They gave me like this super specialized project, which is like, if you guys know Java, there's this thing called Castor. It's like this specific technology of like this specific sector, and they wanted me to do like this project that should have taken like a day, but took like I don't know, took like basically my whole internship, because you know, like the first day I get there, they say, okay, like here's like a bunch of code. We want you to draw like a UML diagram, right? It's just like how all the parts like work together, right? All the individual modules. Like, okay, I can do that. Not a big deal. And I say, okay, like what program can I use? They're like, oh, we'll like get you Visio, and I'm like, okay. So like I click, and I'm like, okay, how do I do this? And they're like, oh, well, you have to like call it in. So I like call this guy in the IT department. He has me like download this program to get Visio, and then I do it, and then I get like an email back. It's like, your request is processing. It will be ready in 14 days or whatever. So I'm just like, okay. So like I can't even begin work until like I have to get all these programs, all these licenses, all this stuff. You know, ended up using all these open source things. But the point is, you know, I mean,
you wonder why Lehman went under.
Yeah, right. I mean, the people there were no doubt smart and everything. But I mean, the point is like, you know, the difference in, you know, my first day at OMGPOP is. You know, basically it's like, here's like a project, here's like a huge thing, here's a problem we're dealing with, right? And it's like, okay, you know, solve it. And you know, because like in a startup mentality, it's not like, you know, like sure, like, you know, you have people you can talk to, right? I talked to Jason about like a lot of problems. You know, he's built you know, a good amount of the system and stuff, but you know, like when you're in that situation, right? It's like, you know, you can own your whole project. You say like, okay, like how do I do this, right? And then once you start like kind of building structure for yourself, start doing things, and you know, before you know it, you've like built this thing that everyone's using now, right? You know, it's a big difference, and I think personally for me at OMGPOP, you know, like what that translates to is, you know, that's a hard thing to do. Like if I were to go back to Lehman, if they still existed, you know, I would be the one who's saying, okay, well, these are like the design decisions we have to make, right? And as opposed to, and this is how we're going to implement it and all that, which isn't thinking that you get to do at the ground level, right? So, like I said, you know, owning those projects is a very cool thing. Just as for OMGPOP, I mean, a lot of the projects we're dealing with are like scale projects. So like Jason said, like if you have 1 million users, you know, all of a sudden like incrementing a number on the computer becomes extremely hard, right? And you know, a lot of little things that you make assumptions with, you know, stop working. So it's really cool. A lot of the challenges that, you know, you learn things in CS that are like, oh yeah, this is like linear, yeah, or whatever. You know, as the number of things grow, oh, it'll be fine. But actually, it turns out to be non-linear, and you know, things don't scale like you would. So as far as you know, making games, it's really fun. It's awesome. You know, it's really cool to see. My favorite part about it is like, you know, seeing how people react to changing the game, right? So like I was saying before, you know, like changing the price of something will definitely affect how much people buy or how much they don't, right? Changing the fundamentals of the game. You know, if we add a tutorial, right, versus no tutorial, like there's lots of like crazy things. Like if you guys are like interested in user behavior too, like there's a lot of cool problems with that as well. You know, we work how it works inside our company. We have a lot of Flash developers who like develop that. We have illustrators. We have like back-end engineers, which is where I work. We're completely Ruby-based on the back end, which is pretty cool, right? Not too many people actually have scaled Ruby to this size. You know, Twitter used to use it; they're off it now. So I mean, in general, there's, you know, a lot of cool problems. There's a lot of creative people there. You know, the process of creating a game is kind of a crazy thing, right? I mean, like how do you create something new, right? And you know, at the end of the day, you know, no game is usually like created out of thin air. But you know, so the process is really cool too, and you get to work with a lot of cool people. So, yep. Thanks.
So you guys, so Pete was the head of product at Daytech, which you guys are too young to know, but was a big online, one of the first, I guess the first online brokerage, and went public and was a big success. And then he ran the Engineering Advantage, which is a huge engineering project. And then now he's VP Engineering or CTO? CTO at Knewton, which is the K Knewton. It's a online education company.
Thank you for the intro. In startups that don't do lots of video, you get butterfly clips instead of good lav mic connectors. I may have some extra ones at the office if you need them. Yeah, Lehman would have a better setup, or at least somebody to clip it. Yeah, so I think, you know, similar to these guys, I think one of the big differences in terms of my experience was I actually didn't go to school for CS. I have an art history degree, and started learning at a very young age how to develop software. So I learned from kind of a VIC-20 coding in BASIC, trying to invent some games for myself. But my first job out of, like, actually during school, as I was a senior, was developing products for a 3-man shop in Syracuse, New York. And I had actually developed a shopping cart software, which was for Front Page at the time and all Microsoft stuff, but took a product from absolutely nothing to actually shipping, and we had about 100 users, small numbers overall. But working inside that 3-person company, I learned almost as much as I learned about developing software and shipping software as I had until I started at Knewton. Again, so everything from how you set up machines to getting firewalls in place, getting networks together, to the actual process of creating websites, getting SSL certs, like all the fundamentals that as you get into larger companies, I started at Daytech as Daytech already had you know, hundreds of thousands of customers, and started Advantage when we already had hundreds of thousands of customers. So you had a lot of that infrastructure already there by the time I got there. But when you come into a startup, there's just a lot of things that you'll learn that you will never learn in a larger company. some of the opportunities that we give to interns at our shop, we actually have one of the most recent interns that we had. He was shipping code in the first 3 days that he was on site. So everybody gets SVN and commit access, and everybody can do deployments from their box. So got his first project, day 1 was shipping by day 3, and I think his previous internship was at Morgan Stanley, where I think he had a similar kind of full internship, never shipping or barely shipping before the internship was over. Now that kid is now that intern is working on doing what we call auto tagging, which is taking some of our questions that we have and applying concepts to those questions. So the accuracy still has quite a bit of work to do, but he conceptualized the product all by himself, has started gathering all the data for it, and actually started applying some methods that he's learning in school while doing this internship work for us. So we try to give people a pretty broad range from just learning how to develop software and how to ship software, all the way through doing more complex and complicated projects. We are hiring. We're hiring for internships, both for the summer as well as right now. So if people have kind of free time during the school year, we're looking for people. All right.
One thing I'll also add is that all of these companies and Hunch were all venture backed, and when companies are venture backed, meaning a VC is invested, basically you get, contrary to some myths, I mean, you don't get Wall Street salaries, but you generally get a competitive salary, like a salary that will compete with like a Google or something. And in addition, you get equity, which you never know what it'll be worth, but that means equity means some percentage of the company, which is potential upside, but you also get a market salary, I should say, in most of these companies. And
yeah, the one other thing I would add is that the one other thing I would add is our internships are also paid. So we pay an hourly rate, a fair hourly rate for interns. So let me know if you're interested, and I also have some swag in the back if you guys want shirts or frisbees.
Yeah, we only do paid internships. I morally opposed to unpaid because it just ends up helping out the rich kids only or something. I don't know. I just think it's a terrible system. So I think most startups we know do. You guys, OMGPOP is venture backed, well funded, and also hiring a lot. You have a lot of openings, right? I think. Or
yeah, tons of openings.
Yeah. And now maybe Dave and Nick. Would you guys mind just talking for a second? Sure. So Dave and Nick are Columbia CS grads from what, 2 years ago?
I was 08, Dave was 09.
Okay, so they're close to home here, and then they worked for a while, and they can talk about that. And then they just finished Y Combinator, which is, you may know, is this kind of prestigious program that's a sort of incubator program, and they've just been, I don't know, I can't seem to get them out of our office. They just keep coming around hanging. I'm just joking. No, they're just hanging out of our office because we like them. So, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. That was awesome. So we've been kind of like hanging out here at the kind of the good graces of the rest of Hunch, which is really cool because it's an awesome space. But so we were I'm right out of Columbia, and I was working at startups kind of as an intern for a while. And I guess, if you guys are thinking about starting a company or just doing it, one of the best ways, and this is kind of shameless, but one of the best ways is to work at startups. And our dirty little secret is we're working on a hiring company, so we're startup people, but we're also technical recruiters, so we can find you jobs, so you should talk to us. But, it's there, I guess the one kind of thing about working at startups is that I learned over the course of being at school is that you can ask for things and then just get them, and they may not have been available to you. And Nick and I actually were up at Columbia a couple of days ago when we spoke, so I already told this story. So for those of you who were there, I apologize. But you just should overreach. The way I got into startups, I was working at CUIT, which is the Columbia IT organization, and I was in the Network Operations Center, and I did that for 2 years. And the summer after my sophomore year, I was well, I don't want to do that anymore. But I was too lazy to apply to Google because they had this big application process. And it's they'll do 12 interviews or whatever. So I was trolling the CS job board, and there was one company that had a posting for for they had like CSS Zen Masters and PHP Ninjas, and I was like, all right, whatever. So, and it was a full-time job, and I emailed them, and I was like, hey, I'd like to work for you as an intern. And they were like, yeah, sure. So that was like how I got into startups. And the next year, I wanted to work at this company called Bug Labs, because I was CE, and I'm into hardware, and they do that kind of stuff. And so I emailed them, and they didn't have any internship postings, and I was like, yo, I'd like to work for you as an intern. They were like, all right, come down and talk to us. And I went to talk to them, and they were like, the HR guy, Matt, said, you seem like a great fit. This will be awesome. There's one thing: we don't pay interns. And I was like, well, I can't work for you then. I'm living in New York, and it's really expensive. And he was like, all right, well, let's just keep talking, and why don't you go home and play with the SDK tonight? So I went home, and Nick and I were working on his senior project at the time. And I went home, and I was like, oh, I want to work here, but they don't pay, but whatever. And then overnight, I worked till like 4 a.m. I made a stupid little Twitter client that worked on the bug. And I sent it to them, and the next day they emailed me, and they said, hey, we will pay you. How much do you want to be paid? So you should just ask for things. And you should work at startups if you're thinking about it. Like, first of all, it's not hard to start your own company. You just have to be jobless, which right now is really easy. but if you don't want to make that plunge yet, you should work for startups, because you will get responsibility. You will learn more than you would working at Morgan Stanley or whatever you were thinking of, and you will find out if it's what you want to do. And that's my spiel. And here's Nick.
Hey, so I'm a bit of an odd case. I was C's 08, but I decided relatively early, age 14, that I was going to start my own company. So yeah, I started some joke companies, but I knew I always wanted to. And during the dot-com bubble, when I was 15, 16, I worked in a startup as doing some programming, and then they went out of business 6 months later. But then got to Columbia, and I don't know, I really hope this has changed since when I was there, but when I went to the engineering career fair in 2006, I was looking, where I was going to do my summer internship, and I went through that book that was 150 plus companies that come and recruit on campus, and I think I counted 5 that weren't in finance or NSA subcontractors. And so, but luckily, one of those 5 it turned out to be a company that I worked for, Open Plans, which was a great place, who's actually also hiring, looking for lots of developers. But I think I hope that's changing. But if it hasn't changed, you probably already have picked it up from what everyone else has said here, but that's not representative. And there are dozens and dozens of startups that can pay a competitive salary that are just desperate to hire you. So don't be discouraged if you go to the career fair and that's all you see. There's much more out there. So
there's no risk in working for a startup, especially one that's venture backed. It's not the only risk is your job may not be there in 3 years. But are you going to work at the same place for more than 3 years? No, you're probably going to find another job anyway. So there's zero risk. Sorry, you can talk now.
I've also got Knewton a couple of times as well, right? So
right. Yes.
A lot of these jobs that are perceived as being kind of stable, steady jobs aren't guaranteed either.
Well, it's not even just if they go out of business. It's also that big companies will do layoffs, and there's no loyalty there. I think there's much more, in my experience, loyalty at startups, because you actually are you're friends with everybody. Tonight we're all playing. In fact, if any of you want to join us, we have played German board games on Friday nights, which I guess says something about our social lives. But anyways,
all right, that's enough for me. So, thanks.
So just maybe briefly, Matt is our Hunch here is our CTO and founder. Matt went to MIT, he was CS there. He worked as an intern, originally as an intern for me and some of the other people here for our last company, and did a great job. And then we managed to convince him to work for us for another year, and then he finished school while we were acquired, and then freed up again, and has been working, he really works on the core technology stuff here, and we'll talk a little bit about his background maybe, and then about some of the stuff we're working on at Hunch. And we're, like all the other companies, we're always hiring if you're really, really, really good.
Yeah, I guess these guys probably covered most of the things I can say about startups, but for me, like as Chris was saying, like one of the great parts about being a startup is your talents get recognized, and that's kind of great as an engineer or computer science person. You work at a big company, you tend to be a small cog in a larger part of the system, and even if your talents get recognized, if you don't sort of have the political skills, I guess, to make things happen, then it can be a much slower sort of ascent to your career, basically. And then I guess the other kind of great thing about being in a startup is also that it's just you get to work with just like a much smarter, higher level group of people, which it kind of makes just your whole life and everything a lot better. Like not having to deal with like big company sort of bureaucracy and things like that. Like we had to work for McAfee. I only worked for McAfee for about, I guess maybe I shouldn't say this on camera.
This
unnamed large company, spent a few months working there and kind of realized after that it's not really kind of anything that I ever want to do again. So
I would describe, like most large companies are like imagine like the football players at high school, and they all get together and they say, now we're called Intel, and then there's in all these places there's like 10 people who actually know what they're doing building the chips. Basically there's like there's like McAfee, I'm sure there's like 10 people in Bulgaria or something who actually do antivirus, but the rest of the company is like the people you didn't like in high school, and now they're like telling you what to do. Basically that's the way I describe it. Like
yeah, it's the case, finance as well, that it's just there's your value in a company is sort of proportional to the number of years that you've worked there, and like even if you haven't really done anything, as long as you like sort of stay there for a long time, and it's just sort of assume that you kind of rise to the ranks a little bit. But if you work at a startup and you're really valuable to the company in the process, you have a larger say in decision making things, and because startups are in general just more efficient with labor. And
can you talk specifically about some of the technical stuff you're working on?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of interesting
machine learning. Okay, so.
Oh yeah, a lot of you. Yeah, so mainly work on Hunch's sort of personalization algorithm, which more or less tries to, we kind of have the ambitious goal of trying to personalize the web. So trying to crawl all the users on Facebook, every public entity on the user entity on the web, and be able to recommend any of those people to any of the items or entities that we crawl on the web. So whether it be Foursquare venues or Facebook pages or Twitter users to follow, the idea is that we sort of try to gather a taste profile for every user and for every item, and then use machine learning algorithms.
How big the data set is in the sequence? You got to
well, it's I don't know. It can be, I guess, a little daunting, but there's about like 30 billion edges that we've crawled so far in the whole taste graph, and so that's just the raw edges files are hundreds of gigabytes. So being able to process that data, it just introduces a whole bunch of different challenges that maybe probably never faced before. A lot of kind of assumptions of like operating systems and database software and all those kinds of things breaks down when. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the, for example, like one of the most recent problems I was working on is we got a machine that has like 256 gigabytes of memory in order to like fit like a reasonable amount of the data set in memory at a time, so you can sort of sample from edges and draw inferences and try to find correlations between users and the things that they like. And like just there's, I imagine there's probably maybe 100 or 200 people that have tried to fill a machine with that much like useful amount of memory before, and just discovered like kernel bugs related to virtual memory not dropping caches after you have a certain size amount of memory being read, and all kinds of fun stuff. But I don't know if that's really sexing it up. No, it's not too much trade secret. I mean, the trade secret part of it is like sort of how much we've learned along the way, and like kind of things that I would be difficult.
You can describe your trade secret in an hour. It's not much of a trade secret.
Yeah.
So we can talk about how. I mean, it's SVD based.
Yeah. I mean, basically, we kind of have like this sort of latent factor model where we just try to describe like human behavior on a fundamental level, and like a number of variables, like on the scale of like hundreds, not like thousands, and the all of the outputs or inputs that users are entering in our system, like answering one of thousands of different they questions, or liking hundreds of thousands of different items just on Hunch, and then the billions of pages on Facebook. Those all are sort of input variables that we use to sort of infer the values of these smaller subset of latent variables, which combined can sort of explain a lot of the variance that you see in different aspects of trying to determine affinity between users and items. So. And let's see what else.
So yeah, I mean, so like, well, tell me if I'm wrong, but like we basically, I think we sort of started with kind of the best academic work. We had people with, like, for example, working on the Netflix Challenge, working with us, and started from there, which is always good to do. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, but found that a lot of those algorithms, like a lot of academic work, didn't apply at a larger scale, it wasn't performance. Didn't perform well enough, because like in the real, we want to have something that we don't have to come back in 24 hours and get a recommendation or something. We want to do it right away, and so we had to do a lot of work around that kind of stuff. So we have like a special kind of SVD, which we call incremental SVD, which lets you take a brand new user and put it in without having to do a big computation. So we run this big computation that takes about 3 days now on this giant machine. We actually have this. I was sort of shocked to learn machine language in part of it, because it's like the inner loops of this thing has become so. It's unusual that these days to be CPU bound. Most computational problems with the Moore's law, etc., have become typically you're database bound. I would say in most cases. At startups, like probably you guys, I imagine most of your issues are on databases, right? Like we actually have this weird problem of being CPU bound. So that creates a whole set of challenges. And we keep working on getting that kind of faster and better, and so it's some pretty interesting technical challenges. And I think we're believers that there's different views on sort of startups. A lot of startups these days you'll see in New York and California are maybe less sort of hardcore tech focused. We think a lot of those are great, and we're fans of them. We just, as a team, like kind of more technical things, and we think there's value in creating that kind of stuff. So we sort of see ourselves broadly in the kind of, machine learning search world or something like this, and we think this is an important problem, and so.
Yeah, and just in general, like, as a technologist, like, sort of one of the best outcomes that, if you do sort of consider yourself a technologist, like maybe a lot of you end up going into finance, or maybe not, while maybe engineering majors in college, you might not actually think of yourselves as, as an engineer, as a trade or whatever. But if you do sort of just like building things, there's definitely just like a certain satisfaction that you get, and one of the biggest obstacles to that is just having access to resources, working with smart people, not having to deal with politics and things like that hindering just the actual fun of it and the actual enjoyment that you can get out of it. So,
any questions so far? Or? We have maybe Jocelyn, if you just speak briefly. So Jocelyn, like Dave and Nick, so Hunch, Knewton, and OMGPOP are all venture-backed, a little bit like, quote, later stage, even though we're all early stage. Nick and David are still sort of pre-funding, working on their thing. Jocelyn is also pre-funding, and she can talk a little about her background.
Sure. I actually just wanted to speak a little bit because I wanted to give you the perspective of somebody who isn't really from a tech background. I was a liberal arts major undergrad. I actually went to Columbia Business School and was doing commercial real estate right after business school. And you know, a lot of the people that have spoken have come from the startup scene and are very, you know, into the startup community. There are a lot of people like me that went to business school and have ideas for startups and products and actually don't really have a sense of where to turn to actually get their product built. So they may have very deep industry knowledge and may see a problem that could be solved in an easy way. And this is sort of speaking to the less technical types of startups and more market-focused startups. But you know, there's a shortage of good engineers in the city, and like everybody's been saying, a lot of times bigger companies, finance companies, or even just like, you know, the Googles will hire good engineers. So there are plenty of opportunities for people who don't who aren't necessarily from the startup background they want to look for engineers like yourselves to help them start out, and sometimes they bring other stuff to the table. I guess yeah. I mean, I also would like to echo what other people were saying, that it's kind of an ideal situation to work for startups right out of undergrad, just because they're one of the few places where hierarchy is less important than. It's not a matter of how long you've worked at a particular company. Your sort of status in the company doesn't depend on how senior you are as much, and it's more of a meritocracy. So it's, I think, appealing, and something that I wish I'd known a little bit more when I was coming out of an undergrad. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this is a good example of if you're thinking about doing a startup, like you know, there's different ways to do it. One is join a startup, join one of like the companies, the type of companies that are here. Another is to just, you know, join up with some of your buddies in school, like Dave and Nick did, and start something. And another is to find someone like Jocelyn who has industry knowledge, you know, and sort of is one half of, you know, is the peanut butter to your jelly or whatever. And sorry, I don't know. No, but I think one thing that you learn over time is that there's that certainly engineering is core to technology startups, but there's also a lot of other stuff that, you know, you don't learn just sort of from the engineering side. There's stuff around fundraising, around analyzing markets, around partnering with customers, and, you know, I think there's a lot that you can gain from you know, some of the best teams I've seen are teams where there's sort of one of each, you know, and, you know, ideally, you know, each side sort of has some knowledge of what the other side's doing, and they kind of work well together like that. But I think that's another thing you should think about is if you're thinking about going this way and starting something, is sort of partnering up with somebody with maybe a different sort of complementary set of skills. Yeah, and just going back to the point about I had no idea this world existed when I was an undergrad. I thought that I grew up. My parents were academics. I thought that all people with intellectual curiosity became academics, and that I thought the business world was just like, you know, I don't know, all salespeople trying to screw people or something. I don't know. They were like, my parents were like socialist, liberal, whatever. But like, and then for me, it was like this discovery. It was like, wow, you can like work with interesting people on interesting problems. You know, like Matt said, like with people that you respect. And, you know, potentially you can make good money, and, you know, but for me, I wanted to live in New York, and like I was worried like can I afford to live in New York, and my parents, you know, are academic English professors, and they ended up in Ohio because it's really hard to get jobs, and I was like, basically one of my primary career goals was to not live in Ohio, and so like the fact that you could do kind of all of those things to me was like a discovery that you know, I'm not like complaining, but I kind of wish I knew about it before, you know. But you know, and so that's one of the things we're trying to do by talking to you guys and just whatever, kind of trying to connect the startup world and the academic world, and just let you guys know that this stuff exists. I guess it's any questions? You must have some questions. Yeah.
So are there ways to get involved with startups, or in what ways do you recommend getting involved with startups when you don't have as much of a technical background as a lot of people?
Well, like Eric, would you mind coming up here for a second? This is a good example. Eric just graduated from Duke recently, and he contacted us. He's like, I have an offer at Goldman Sachs. I don't want to work at Goldman Sachs. I want to work at a startup. And we're like, great, but we're not hiring. You know, good luck. And then, right, I guess. You can tell the story.
Sure. So I just graduated from Duke in May.
You were an econ major.
I was an econ major, undergrad, and I had worked at Goldman my junior summer, and Merrill Lynch the summer before that. And so, like, all through college, I thought I was going to work on Wall Street, doing that sort of thing. I kind of worked on some startups in college. I got introduced to that world and really just kind of fell in love with it. Really liked the emphasis on like innovation, building interesting things that people like to use. And so I kind of began to pursue that maybe my junior year. Being a non-technical person, I'd say the first thing to do is just read everything you can get your hands on. So that's just knowing what's going on, knowing what people are doing, know it better than anybody else does. When somebody brings up a startup that they think is interesting, you should be able to say like, oh, here are like 3 other startups that are like kind of doing that sort of thing, maybe with like a different spin. Just knowing the market really well like is really good to start with.
How did you do that?
So obviously you guys read Chris's blog, things like that. That's like one place to start, right? Another is just talking to people. So reaching out to alumni who are working at startups, doing interesting things, asking what they're seeing, and you'd be surprised, especially people who are fairly new out of college, always willing to talk to people. So reaching out to people, talking to other people with similar interests, finding those people, I guess, amongst yourselves, and just bouncing ideas off of each other, I think is something that's really, really important. In September, I got an offer to go back to the investment bank I worked at. And it was followed by, I'd say, like 20 phone calls from people at the bank being like, hey, pressuring you to make a decision. And at the time, like there's, all of my friends are going after these jobs. So it's like a tough thing to do to say, like, take a step back, figure out what you really want to do. So that's exactly what I did, take a step back, began to reach out to people in the startup world. I knew I wanted to be in New York City. And most of them said, like, hey, that's great, but like we have no idea where we're going to be in May. So it's kind of a tough position to be in because nobody can commit, but you have to commit to saying no to somebody. So I just kind of took a leap of faith a little bit and decided that this is what I wanted to do and just kind of go for it. So I spent the next 5-6 months learning about the market, learning about what people were doing, kind of getting some skills in terms of like design and things like that that I could pick up somewhat easily. And then when May came around, took a internship at Hunch, no promise of getting a full-time job, and then again kind of another leap of faith, and things kind of just worked out. So I would encourage everyone to kind of have a passion for doing this. Like if you have a passion for doing this, just like pursue it with all your force. Like people will see that you'll have a passion, and they'll want to be around you, and they'll want you to like work on their team. So coming from a non-technical background, I can say like you can get a cool, awesome job at a startup. It might be a little bit more difficult. There might be less jobs out there, but it's ultimately really rewarding. The last thing I'll say is that going to work at a bank or going to work at maybe a bigger company, there are structures that are very set in their ways. Like for 2 years, what you're doing in banking is exactly what the kid last year did in banking for the past 2 years, right? Like you all get the same exact responsibilities that the kid last year got. You're all learning the exact same things that the kid last year got. And you never really get to kind of break out of what the entry-level person is doing. I'd say at a startup, the best position to be in is when like the amount of things to do just far outpaces the amount of people who can do them. So you get to really do things that are just way above what an entry-level person in any other industry might be doing. So you know, yeah, exactly. So like, I mean, it's a great position to be in, right? Like, I'm right out of college, and you know, I work primarily on biz dev with Shavel, who's not here right now. But you know, if he has like 5 meetings one day, and then you know we have an inbound request for another meeting with like a big company to meet with like their CEO of like VP of partnerships or marketing, and Shavel's like, well, I can't make that. Like, Eric, like, you know, just like take that call or go meet with them. I mean, that's a great position to be in, right? Like
meeting the CEOs of public companies.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like I like show up and, you know, like dressed like this, kind of like a schlub, like, and they're like wearing like their like, you know, like Armani suits, and they just kind of like look at me. But
the
like,
other day we had 7 people from GE. What were they?
Yeah, like we had like 7 people from GE just come in, like, and yeah, myself and Kelly like just kind of greeted them at the door. They're all wearing like their
head of Italy's.
Yeah, like the head of like oil distribution in Dubai for like GE, and they were like, hey, we're here to like learn what the startup scene's all about. And they're just like, oh, okay. So you like entertain them for like 30 minutes or whatever. I mean, it's fun, but like, you know, like it's just like a good example of like you know, when you're working at a startup as an entry-level person, like nobody else is, you know, working at banks or working at bigger companies or having these opportunities.
All your friends are at these banks now. Like,
yeah, exactly.
What are they doing?
I mean, yeah, so they're doing exactly what you think they're doing, like, right? Like I talk to my friends, like working at like, you know, like these huge banks, and they're like, okay, they're like making PowerPoints and like doing like 20 turns on them. So like, hey, could you actually mind putting like a period after like this, you know, this sentence here? Like that would be really great with my schedule. And they just have to like oh, it's like, you know, Friday at like 12. You could get that on my desk by like Monday morning at like, you know, 7 a.m. And it's just like, you know, it's like, it's the typical horror stories that you hear about, where it's just like very depersonalized, right? Like, and that's just not the way it is.
You're thinking about banking. Do you read Monkey Business?
Was that the?
That was the one. Read that book. It's a first year investment bank.
Yeah. So I mean, you can. The horror stories like are true. Like I'm sure you like, if you've worked at a bank, like you know this stuff. I don't think I need to like bash on it anymore. I think like they do a good job enough of like building that reputation. But yeah, I mean, just like working at a startup is just like a great way to be doing stuff that people your age just aren't doing. And I think, you know, that'll go a long way. You know, I hope in maybe like starting a business in the future or something like that. I think it's probably the best way to prepare yourself if you want to be an entrepreneur in the future. I probably agree, right?
Yeah, in fact, and I always tell people here, like, I hope that, you know, we're successful and then people go on and start companies. And we've had one person leave Hunch, and he went on to start a company, and we actually funded him. We meaning me and some other people, my friends who invest in startups. In fact, he came back, it was last Friday, and was giving us all a demo, and we had a little party. It was fun, you know. So like, this is like the spirit of the thing is like, you know, I think it's very collaborative, and you know, I mean, it varies too. You have to make sure that the startup, there are startups who don't have that attitude, and you should, if you're thinking about joining one, you should find out a lot about them and make sure that, you know, I mean, there are also horror stories in startup world. It's like everything, right? Like there's probably good banks on Wall Street too, and there's bad startups, you know. So like, so you know, it's like, it's a lot of it's the people. It depends on the environment. You want a place where people are open, where they're honest. It's fairly easy to check around and see about people's reputations. You know, I always like say, you know, when I'm trying to recruit somebody, I say just call everyone who worked at my last company and tell me, and I'll give you a list of everyone who worked there, and you call anyone you want and ask what they think. You know, like did we take care of them? Did we? You know, that's the best way to, and that's a totally fair question to ask, by the way. If you're getting hired, you should ask how much money's in the bank. If they don't tell you these things, I think I wouldn't work there. If they're giving you equity, what percentage of the company is that? You know, what are the terms of it? You know, is it an option? What is the strike price? You know, all this financial stuff. You know, what's my possible career path? And I think if they don't answer those questions, I wouldn't work for them.
If you're starting a technical company and like you basically build an app yourself, you know, in weeks or something, when do you start saying I want to turn this into a company, or angel investment, or start seeking a first round investment, or like if you're a technical person, you just write.
Well, I think a lot of that's good. So the question is, if you're a technical person and you've written something, when do you think about making a company or raising money? I mean, part of the answer, what I would say is go start showing it to as many people as you can, and the market will kind of tell you. Like, in other words, you know, if you go talk to a bunch of angel investors and they say we want to invest, then maybe that's an option. You know, in most cases, people will say, "Oh, Bill, you know, come back when you have a little bit more," or you know, this and that. And you know, what they'll do is they'll give you valuable feedback as to what more they would want to see. And so I would say, you know, without talking to people, you're just sort of guessing that, you know, and you're just sort of making these decisions in a void. And that you should talk to as many people as you can. And I don't know, Pete, do you have something to add?
No, I was going to say, if you have the idea, you should probably start talking as early as you can, like maybe before you actually have a prototype or a demo built.
Yeah, I think there's this myth that if you guys don't read, I have a blog about this. Everything I say is probably already on my blog, so I should just be like citing my blog. But I have something about how you shouldn't keep your ideas secret. Blog cdixon.org, by the way, for all of the international viewers, cdixon.org. So we're gonna have like 3 people watching, but so I always argue you shouldn't keep your ideas secret. People think that their ideas are much more unique than they are. Like, I hear a lot of ideas pitched, and they're very rarely unique. It's, you know, usually there's like an interesting spin on it or whatever. And the reality is that the idea, I mean, all of it, Facebook, Google, everything, none of that stuff was new. Like, there was a social network 6 Degrees in 1998 or whatever. It's all about how they executed it. It's all about how they built it and the timing. And so the better thing to do, yeah, exactly as Pete said, you go talk to people, you get their feedback. A lot of people have been around for a while. They say, hey, I've seen that before. Not to say it's a bad idea, but I've seen why they failed, and let me tell you the 5 reasons why and what you might do to prevent it from failing. You know what I mean? Like, guys like me and Pete have been around doing this for 10 plus years, and so we've seen like cycles of this stuff, you know, so we can like tell you, kind of help you with that, you know, the historical stuff there, you know, and like, and there's stuff to be learned there, because a lot of those entrepreneurs are really good entrepreneurs who failed, you know, like they aren't idiots, you know, so, you know, maybe the timing was wrong, or maybe they just didn't do it right, or whatever. I mean, like Groupon is this big success now. I can't tell you how many things I saw before that was like collective buying that failed, and I think it's probably a combination of they did a really clever job, and also the time was right, you know, and there's sort of a whole confluence of factors. So I would say go talk to as many people as you can, and you know, also if you have something built, like, and let's say it's sorry, that's my phone. I'm sorry. If you have something built and it's like has possible customers, whether they're like, you know, business customers, or if it's a consumer product, like try to go get it out there and get feedback, and you know, just sort of the more. Think of it as like it's a process of trying to think of it sort of a scientific method where you're trying to gather data in a very, very data scarce environment, sort of like, you know, as to like what people will think of your thing, about the funding, and the other challenge here is that in the startup stuff, like so much stuff is just not written down. Like, it's better now, like there are blogs. 10 years ago, there's none of this stuff, so it was like, even like the terms of how you raise money were like this sort of weird folklore kind of thing. Like if you weren't in the, you know, it's like, and now it's like at least more public, but still a lot of this stuff, like who's hiring now, what are the cool start, like it's not really blogged about that much, and like you got to go talk to people, and then, you know, whether your product is interesting to people, there's no way to do that but to go kind of see if it is, you know, and like, and chances are it's not initially. I mean, almost all successful companies have what they say, as they say, like pivoted or adjusted, or as they've gotten feedback. So, you know, it's just, you're just such a paucity of sort of input data into this thing that the first best thing you should do is go aggressively out there and get as much data as you can, launch a product, talk to people, you know, etc. Right? Your rich uncle or something. That was it. And I didn't have a rich uncle, so it was VCs, but like, so yeah. You had a question, Dave?
Not a question, just like for those of you guys that are thinking about like starting something now, like, and you speak to people, some people will be like, oh well, you know, I want to get a few more years of experience and then, you know, I will do a startup. That's bull, because you're like, there's no better time than now, because there's no lower risk time for you than now, because you're used to living in college and like cheap and all this stuff. So like, yeah. Just do it right now.
I agree. I mean, I tend to agree. Like the best way to start a company is to start a company or whatever. And then I think the second best thing is to work at a startup if you're not quite ready for that. Like if you have loans or other finance, you know, or just feel like you do. A big mistake is just to think that by working at Google or consulting or something that you're actually getting preparation for a startup. It's basically zero transferable skills. In fact, it might be negatively. You might have, I think, but no, seriously, it's like that I see all the time. Doing PowerPoints at McKinsey has zero. In fact, it's a negative. I would, if Eric had done that for 2 years, we probably wouldn't even had him intern, frankly, because like I would have said, this guy's, you know, not a real startup person. You know, he's not willing to take risks. I mean, like a lot of it was about the fact that the guy had this. He had, you know, it says a lot. You have an offer from Goldman Sachs, and you know, I don't know what his personal situation is, but for most people, that's like pretty tempting. And like, you know, if you have loans, etc., and like, to actually turn that down without a job, you know, a real job offer, and come work as an intern. And you know, by the end of it, I was like, wow, this guy's, you know, he's not kidding around. He really wants to do a startup, and he did a great job. And you know, and we'll see what happens. But I think, you know, I think he's on his way to doing what he wants. So.
So I totally buy into the working for a startup scene, and then as you described. But say you're interested in a particular area, and you specify that, you know, for a particular idea, there are many startups in the same scene, but it's like how to execute that matters.
Yeah.
So say you want to look into something, and there are a couple of startups in that scene. How do you do that?
Oh, so you're thinking about joining a startup, you're saying? And which of these, so like there's a couple competitors, and which one do you join? Will you join the one that's going to win? How do you figure that out? There's lots of, I mean, I think you go, that's another thing where you go talk to a lot of people, and not that they have the answers, but sometimes you can be like I might know that such and such startup's about to go out of business, or, oh my God, that guy's a joke, you know, like, on the edges, you can get information on this stuff. You know, I don't know. Like, there's plenty of cases where it's a judgment call, but certainly it's worth doing some research, because there's definitely a lot of cases where a guy like me or Pete or someone else who's sort of in the scene will know, like, sort of. And it's one of these things. Is like, you know, it's like I see it's always just like I have certain friends who are like really talented, and they just like constantly make bad decisions about which startup to join, and I'm like, why are you joining that startup? It's a disaster. Like, and you know, it's just like, you know, it's like the you know, the guy always dates the wrong, I don't know what, or it's just like, you know, it's like one of these things like over and over, and I just like, I finally like given up on some of these friends. I just know whatever they do is going to be like, I mean, one of these guys, he's like, he joins a startup, and then he's like, yeah, I'm going to join AOL because dial-up's growing. I'm like, are you this is like 2003, 4, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Dial-up? Like, I'm like, you know, it's true. He's like, no, this whole broadband thing's a fad, and I'm like, oh my God, you know. And then he went and like joined this, like, you know, I don't know, just again and again. But he's like a really, really smart guy, and you know, so had he just went around and like, in the case of the startups, he joined startups that like everyone knew were not good, and like the founders were like sketchy, and like, had he just like asked around and like, I don't know, like, so I would recommend, if you're going to commit to something, doing a little bit of diligence. And usually, what's the best way to do, like, if you're not like plugged in?
I just want to build off of that. Like, the advice that Paul Graham gives to us is he says, if you're joining an early stage startup, you're essentially in the exact same position as an investor. So except rather than investing money, you're investing your time. And so you want to evaluate it in the same way an investor does. So like, look at the team, look at the founders. Do they seem like they're people who will never give up? Like, do they seem like they're smart? Do they seem like they get along well together? Like, a lot of those things look at and like, just kind of put on an investor hat and evaluate the company that way.
There's other like things that are proxy, like sort of signals, as we say, like proxies. Like, if they're funded by a top tier VC, that's often a signal that something is good. If they're, you know, if they're always struggling with money, and like, you know, and again, like, ask how much runway, as we say, like, well, how much time, money in the bank do you have, assuming, you know, no revenue, let's say. Very reasonable question to ask. Has there been management turnover? Has there been, like, you know, some companies have, like, they're on their 8th CEO, and like, you should know that. Like, it doesn't mean it's, you know, sometimes they're very successful on their 8th CEO, but like, you should just know that kind of stuff. Like, how much money have they raised? What are the preferences? It's just like, it's like, I find it's like shameful that every engineering program doesn't teach you like a 1 day on like basic cap structures of. Actually, we wrote my co-founder Tom wrote a Python code for how to do the payout function on venture-backed startups. If you guys are interested, it actually seriously did. It's like the whole thing, because like there's basically it's very simple. I mean, if you're engineering, it's like trivial, but people don't like. So there's something called preferences, which is like don't matter as much these days, but like mattered a lot in the dot-com bubble because they got really crazy. But basically, like the way it works is like if the company raised $40 million, the investors who put cash in have what they're called preferred shares, whereas the founders and the employees have common shares or options on common shares, and the preferred shares get paid out first. And in some cases, companies, like this doesn't happen that much right now, but it has happened in the past where like they would have 4x preferences, which mean if they raised 40 million, they actually had 160 million in preferences, which mean any sale under 160 million, the common would get 0. And I know lots of people, they thought they were like, I own 1% of the company. The company gets sold for $150 million. They're like, where's my 1.5 million? Oh, I didn't know about preferences. Like, it's just outrageous that like this is such a basic fucking, sorry, excuse my language, the 3 people that are watching, it's such a basic concept, though, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, and it's such a reasonable thing I don't know, I think it's totally legitimate to ask this. Some people will say, oh, it's a trade secret, or it's like, you know, why wouldn't you know what, it's like it's as if somebody said to you, you're getting paid $100,000, and you said, what currency? And they said, I won't tell you. Maybe yen or dollars, but you don't know. I mean, of course you need to know what the currency, what is the stock options I have on? Like, it's like, how can you evaluate it without knowing that? Like, so, and I know a lot of startups who don't disclose that, and I think it's just ridiculous. And I'll tell you what happens. I've been in these board meetings, you go in the board meeting, you're like, so-and-so has X%. You walk out of the board meeting and you stop talking about percentages, you start talking about shares, so they don't know how much percentage, and it's just ridiculous.
Just talk a little bit about finding partners as a technical person, probably technical partners to work on your idea.
So finding, you mean you're technical and like looking for another technical person? Yeah, it's the single most important, obviously, and hardest thing. You know, none of these things is like silver bullet. Like you want to do tons and tons of meeting, talking to people. There's lots of events in New York now, these sort of tech meetups. A lot of the problem with these things is that they start out good and then they get diluted kind of over time as like lawyers and consultants start showing up. And so this we call the service provider problem, that ends up being like all just like people trying to sell you stuff or something and like that. You know, what else? Like, you know, I mean, I think if you guys are in school, you know, like that's a great place to meet people like-minded and intelligent. You know, if you're technical, often, you know, if you're gonna, depends on what kind of startup you're doing. I mean, if you're gonna do like a, you know, I don't know what, like some kind of like, you know, material science thing, you need to obviously have like some hardcore material science people. If you know, if you're gonna do like a consumer internet company, you might not actually, and you're technical, you might actually not want another technical person. You might want more of what we would call like a product or a user experience person.
Where would you find that guy?
That's. It was funny. I was just talking to Dave and Nick about it. I think that's the scarcest resource in the. That's like the unobtainium of startup land or whatever. It is the. It's very hard. I mean, you need to go look at websites you love and call people up. Like go to, you know. I mean, it's hard. I mean, you go to design schools and other places like that. I think have some. You know. I think it's the hardest thing to find. There's like a very finite number of people like that. Most people you're going to find in this world are going to be just through going to events and talking to lots of people, but I mean that's hard. I don't have a great answer for that. I would say that, I mean, the one thing I would also say is when you do this, if you do find somebody, you know, make sure you get to know them well, obviously, spend a lot of time with them, set expectations really clearly. If you're going to split the equity, talk about that explicitly, have a contract, have it vest, which means you don't get it over time. I would say a third of companies make the mistake of not having it vest, and then I've seen this a million times. You look at the company and you look at what's called the cap table, which is who owns what in the company, and you're like, you know, I see this guy, I see this person, but who's Jimmy? Oh, Jimmy was this guy who started with us at Columbia, but then he went off to, you know, Peru or something, and now he owns 30% of the company, never did anything, right? This is so incredibly common, and it's such a shame because that 30% could be given to people that are actually contributing to the company, and that's going to be solved with something called vesting, which basically means if you're going to actually do this for real, spend $5,000 on a law firm. If you want a reference, I'll give you one, and do it properly, because it can prevent a lot of headaches later on. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but Like, I'm not a fan of lawyers, but there's certain times in life, unfortunately, when you need to have them, and that's one. Yeah, the good ones will defer fees till you're financed. Yeah.
So follow up to that, people come to you with ideas all the time. Do you actually fund individuals, like technical individuals, or do you want to have that product person with them?
No, in other words, if you're looking to find somebody to pair up with, that's great, and that's something that people like me can help you with. And you're a scarce resource, and you know, like, there are a lot of people that want to meet you, basically. So to ping me after, that's why we're at, you know, partly why we're doing this event is so.
Let's say that we drop out of school to pursue our own idea, and that doesn't end up panning out. How hard would it be to re-enter the startup scene working for another startup without a degree?
I don't think startups care much about degrees at all. I think it, much more importantly, how did you, in that process, did you get to know a lot of people in the startup world and make a positive impression? But, I mean, the founder of OMGPOP doesn't have, he doesn't have a college degree. I invested in him way back when he didn't have a college degree, and I put my own money into it, and I didn't care. He made really good games, and he was like a smart guy. I mean, he could code, it was clear, like, that said, I'm not trying to say anyone shouldn't finish college. Like, it's a great experience. It was the best 7 years of my life, I always say. I sort of took the long route through it. The rest, I always tell Jasper, one of our guys here, that how they say college is the best time of your life. It actually is, and the rest of life is not as fun. I would enjoy it while you can, and it's a good degree to have. It's good to fall back on. If you have a startup you're doing that's taking off, you can often take time off school. A lot of schools will let you back in later. If you make a good impression in the startup scene, you have plenty of options there. There's a lot of people in the startup world now saying, like, you should never go to college. I don't really agree with that. I think it's, I think it's also just like a good time to, like, even if you already know everything there is to know about computers, take some art history classes or something. I mean, like, you're not going to have a chance later on. You're going to be busy, and learn how to, like, I don't know. You get to Columbia, so you all have the core, I guess, so you are well-rounded, and that's good. Because you're not going to read, Homer when you're 35 and, like, have 2 kids or whatever, probably. So you might as well read it now. But I think that's the thing. Generally people don't care about degrees in the startup, but they do care about your reputation, and it's a very, very small world generally. And if you do a good job and you make good impressions, it's like that's good, and because you'll very quickly. I mean, the unemployment rate for talented engineers in the startup world is negative 80% or something. I mean, there's a massive demand for them, and it's very easy to find work if you make, if you're hardworking and this and that. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks, and feel free to hang out and have some food and chat, whatever.